This is Mike Gallen from Digging in the Word, where we'll be feeding right into a video previously recorded earlier this morning on a controversial topic. Good morning, and good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you are looking at this video, it's actually now Wednesday here. I'm at downtown Brooklyn, New York. I'm actually at my work location. I just dropped in to be able to, share some things with you guys this morning. I want to dig in the Word a little bit with you. And this is actually the Wednesday, September the 26th. This is the morning after the infamous decision rendering of the sentencing of Bill Cosby that was handed down yesterday. Yesterday afternoon is actually when I got the news. And since then, it's been quite, somber for me, quite sad. He's a man that I actually grew up watching on television, from his comedy to his cartoons to his television shows. And it's definitely, his material is something that I've enjoyed watching. And I believe I've shed a lot of positive light. Bill Cosby has done a lot of positive things. He has donated more to the HBCUs than any other popular black celebrity figure that exists even to this day. And he's done a lot of things. Although he's done a lot, he's also been a controversial figure. A lot of people have, in the black community particularly, have not been pleased with some of his comments. Many have taken the way that he's addressed the ills of the community as in a condescending way, looking down. And a lot of people took offense to that over the years. Like him or not, love him or not, he is definitely a huge figure. And it was just sad seeing a big giant just fall and be taken down as such. Now he's in prison, and he slept his first night in a cell. 81 years old. One can only imagine what was going possibly through his mind as he spent those first hours and first night in such a predicament. Well, with that said, I know that there's been a lot of chatter. There's been a lot of news coverage, a lot of talk on social media dealing with this subject, people weighing in on with their opinions, giving their feelings, sharing their thoughts, sharing their comments. Now, my whole purpose in doing this video is not to really weigh in an opinion personally of the decision that was made. It is not to weigh in personally my thoughts on whether if he received a fair trial or not. I believe that the question that will be coming from you guys would be, what does the Bible have to say in reference to dealing with sexual allegations with a wholesome principle approach? With that said, what we're going to do is we're going to dig into the Word, and I'm going to extract principles from out of the passage, and I'm going to relate it and I'm going to apply it to what is going on here in the United States, particularly dealing with this situation, this circumstance of dealing with sexual allegations as a nation, sexual allegations in terms of the judicial system that we have here. So the book of Deuteronomy is where we're going to be coming from. And this is Deuteronomy, the 19th chapter. And I'm going to start at the 15th verse, and we're going to go down through to the 21st verse. I'm not going to read it all the way through, but I'm going to take it verse by verse. Verse 15 starts it off. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. In other words, a single witness, one person, according to the book of Deuteronomy, the law, which was the law of Moses, which was handed down to the nation of Israel, to how do you deal with any particular crime. In any particular crime or any particular offense, just having one witness was not suffice, was not enough to render a verdict of guilty. Having one witness, having one person come forth and say, well, this is what happened. This is what took place. This is what I saw. Having one person coming and verifying that information of was not enough. So in other words, there needed to be multiple witnesses, eyewitnesses of people that actually saw or witnessed what took place. And I understand that when you deal with a situation in reference to like rape per se, that you will likely not see a witness. Why? Because the predator will choose a space and place where there's no one else at but they and them and the victim. So in a case like this, another thing that is considered witness would be evidence. Evidence of torn clothes, evidence of bruises, evidence of semen, evidence of DNA. There has to be something else that stands as a witness. There has to be something else that communicates and identifies that this is a crime that took place or that had taken place. The next verse or the next sentence here, he says, only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. So in other words, you can't even get an indictment, a charge, without there being 2 or 3 witnesses. And it has to be the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. It has to be the evidence that is produced. What is an evidence? Evidence is, that which corroborates something, that which verifies something. And so there has to be a verification. There has to be something that verifies, confirms, validates that this particular crime is something that actually took place. The next verse, verse 16, is if a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, and I'm going to go into the 17th verse, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. Now, here's a flip side to this. Not only in Israel, under this system that God established for his people, when God gave the law to Moses, when they were in the desert and they were in the wilderness, coming out of Egypt, going into their established promised land, not only was the crime of an individual, or the alleged crime of an individual who did anything that was wrong or offensive, was to be stood through a vetting process of investigation, a vetting process of sifting through, winnowing through, searching through to determine, to detect whether if there was a crime. Not only was that individual held to be placed on trial, the person who brought forth allegations had to stand on trial as well. So in other words, the accuser not only had to establish credible witnesses that proved what they were accusing the alleged offender of, but their testimony, their accusation, and the credibility of their witnesses all had to be credible. All had to be in line with that which actually took place, that which truly took place. It couldn't have been made up stories. It couldn't have been trumped up charges. It couldn't have been something that, they just wanted to pin on the individual. No, they had the moral obligation to make sure that whatever they were accusing the alleged individual of, that what they were saying, what they were stating, what they were giving testimony to was unadulterated truth. So in the 17th verse, he says, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord. Why? Why both parties? Because the accuser who has made false charges also now gets to stand in the place of being the accused. So, in other words, not only is it a crime to bring any offense to anyone in a particular nation, but it's also a crime to bring forth false charges in a nation that is just and a nation that is holy. Verse 18, it says, the judges shall inquire diligently. So in other words, there should be a thorough investigation. Why should there be a thorough investigation? And if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, verse 19, then you shall do to him as he meant to do to his brother. Now hold on a minute there. What the text is actually saying to us is that not only does the accused stand on trial, the accuser who brings forth false charges now begins to become investigated as well. And so in becoming investigated, and if it's found out through the process of investigation that what they have been attesting to or accusing or alleging is not true, then the accuser will now be rendered an indictment, will be rendered a verdict, a charge. They will be rendered a conviction which comes with the penalty that is in the same penalty that they meant to happen to the person they were bringing false charges to. So now let's take that and let's look at here in the United States. Now we know that when you deal with sexual assault situations, that usually these are very hard crimes to prove. And I believe this is another reason why there's a lot of women that don't come forth. And not only is there not a lot of women that don't come forth, but you think about all of the shame, the embarrassment, all of the questioning, all of the things that has to be exposed, the fear that's involved. And so therefore, women, that are in these situations will normally, in most instances, I believe, don't come forward. And I mean, I don't know the statistics on it, but I don't believe that most victims actually even come forward, because the fear is a very heightened, intense fear. It is a fear of not only of the perpetrator, but it's a fear of being exposed. It's the fear of having your shame and having the fact that you've been violated now being brought out into the open and to the light. And so, there's this fear of coming forward. And so, and as a result of that, a lot of women, a lot of victims, and even children, and even, young boys and girls that have been molested, there's a lot of fear in coming forward. And so, therefore, it's very hard to try and reach a conviction in cases like these. Because a lot of times, even when a person does come forward, it may be much time after, or a later time after the actual alleged account had taken place. And therefore, there was no testing done. There was no investigation that was done of the crime scene. And so therefore, without all of these necessary pieces of evidence that can be provided in a case that can give the best rendered verdict in a particular case, then it's very hard, because now it's his word against hers and her word against his. And so what you have here is that, just as you have men who would be evil enough to prey on women and children, and men preying on other men, you also have women who will prey on men for whatever reason, and bring up false charges. So, the crime, or the pendulum of the crime of sexual, it works both ways, because not only, do we have to, as a society, guard against men who violate the dignity of women, the innocence of women, we also have women who assassinate the character and the liberty of men by bringing forth false charges. So it happens both ways. So there needs to be a thorough investigation in any case when you deal with this subject of sexual offense or sexual crimes or sexual allegations. So the 19th verse again says, "Then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother." So the person who brought false charges, who's been found out for bringing false charges, will now receive the very punishment he intended for his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. And what was the punishment? The punishment in a crime such as this was capital punishment. "And the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity." In other words, don't be afraid of dealing with crime. Don't be afraid of dealing with or slamming down that gavel, rendering that decision, rendering that verdict. Don't be afraid of executing justice, is what the text is saying. It says, "And shall never again," the rest, meaning the people, "shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you." So what's the goal? The goal in being tough on both sides of the pendulum, not just one side, not just, being tough on men who are high profile, have a whole lot of money, and the women were in a weaker position, or the children were in a weak, both sides. There needs to be due process. There needs to be thorough investigation of both sides. The credibility of both sides. Why? Because the crime swings both ways. And so the reason for being tough on this is so that the rest of the society shall hear and fear. Hear and fear what? Hear and fear that you don't want to go down this route of bringing up false charges. You don't want to go down this route of bringing offenses of crimes against anyone, taking the innocence and the dignity and the virginity and the purity of a woman, of a child, of a man, whomever. The purpose and the goal is to make sure that we have a society where we do not offend each other. And the 24th verse says, "Your eye shall have not pity." Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. It's amazing, when it comes to certain crimes, we have no problem in the principle of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But then in other crimes, we let the criminals go free. And the criminals, based on this particular text, is not only the potential alleged man who may have done the offense of raping a woman, taking her innocence, or raping a child or another man and taking their innocence. But it can be the false accusation of women who bring up charges for whatever reason, whether if it's money, status, whether if they wanted to get even for something that took place or whatever. People do evil things for some of the craziest reasons. But needless to say, God commanded his people Israel, the Bible's answer to dealing with such crimes is a fair process. It's not only a fair process, but it's a process that will thoroughly flush out to find the truth before rendering any decision. One more passage that I want to quickly read, and I'm going to read through it first, and then I'm going to touch on it. This is the same book, Deuteronomy. It's the 22nd chapter, the 22nd verse to the 29th verse. It says, if a man is found lying with the wife of another, both of them shall die. The man who lay with the woman and the woman, so you shall purge the evil from Israel. So if a man is caught sleeping with another man's wife, both the man and the woman he's sleeping with were to receive capital punishment. Now, we talk about evil, we talk about crime, we talk about, this is not wrong, this is not right. We label a lot of people and a lot of activities as being evil. But the crime of violating marriage, the biblical principle is that, marriage is so sanctimonious, it's so holy. It is something that should be well treated, so much so that if it's violated, the penalty is capital punishment. Verse 23, it says, if there is a betrothed, or in other words, an engaged to be married virgin, and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman, because she did not cry for help, though she was in the city. And the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife, so you shall purge the evil from your midst. So here you have a situation where a young virgin is pledged to be married. She's engaged. She's, by contract, the legal wife of the man that she's supposed to be married according to the law of Moses. The marriage is just not consummated. And so her virginity is to stay intact, and her virginity is for her husband alone. The problem that arises in this particular incident is that she is found in the city lying with a man other than the man that she's engaged to or betrothed to. So the scripture says that she and the man that are found are both to be dealt with in a capital punishment manner. They each are to be executed. It says, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman, why? Because she did not cry for help, though she was in the city, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Now, what else is this communicating to us? Well, okay, now you have, a situation where you have this woman, she's engaged, she's a virgin, she's now caught with the next man. She's caught with the next dude. So the punishment is they both are to be taken to the gate of the city, and they are to be stoned to death. That's the capital punishment. Now, why does the woman receive the punishment? Because if she was raped, she had a moral obligation to yell, cry for help. At least cry for help even after the alleged crime took place. Why? Because going back to the previous principle that we read in the scripture that we read in the 19th chapter, 15th to the 21st verse, the very principle in is that is that God has concern for the whole community. It's for the whole nation. And so therefore, as a citizen of this nation, she had a moral obligation to cry for help. Not only because she's been violated, but if this is a person who has a demented, this man who violated her in such a way had such a demented mind and the gall to do so, then he has the potential of doing this to another victim. And so the moral obligation that she has is to cry. She still has a civic duty even though she is a victim. And one of the problems inside this nation is that we have this thing called statute of limitations, whereby as victims, the victims can, stretch it out. And in many of the instances, in some locales, whether it's molestation, even if the statute of limitations is surpassed, you still can get a DA to bring forth indictment, bring forth charges on the alleged victim, on the alleged perpetrator, through a class action. So in other words, if you have 5 women, 9 women, 100 women now come forth and say, well, hey, we've all have been violated, or we've all had separate incidences where we've been violated by this particular individual. And so therefore now, based on a class action principle, the charges can be brought against. But here's the problem with that system altogether. The problem is that it never protects immediately those after the incidents. In other words, a man rapes a woman in the city. He leaves her in the stairway of the hallway of a high-rise building where he rapes her at. The woman never yells. She alleges that she was raped, but she never yells. She never goes and make a claim. And what happens? This perpetrator who has this demented mindset now is free to go and commit the same crime to someone else. So what does she do? She withholds her civic duty to her neighbor. And so the very principle is that if you want the legal system to now protect you, and you want the legal system to repay against those who perpetrated crime against you, you're coming to the community. You're coming to the community for help. You're coming to the community to give you aid and give you assistance and give you support in your victimization. But at the same time, are you being a citizen and protecting others from being victimized? That's the big question. That's the big underlying question that needs to be answered when we address this situation of sexual assault here within the United States. Women bring up false charges, and I've never even heard of a case of a woman who's brought up false charges and have gotten convicted for bringing up the false charge. Now, maybe some of you may have seen or heard of a crime or witnessed a crime or been involved in a particular crime. You may have been a victim. I don't know. If you have, comment me, write me, email me, and let us know. Because I've never heard of a case of a woman who's brought forth, or a victim or alleged victim who's brought forth charges, allegations, accusations, and those allegations was found to be untrue, and they themselves now are placed on trial, or they themselves are indicted for bringing forth the false crimes, and receive the same amount of crime or the same amount of sentencing or punishment that they intended for the very person that they were bringing false charges against. Now that's justice. That is eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Let's finish this off. So it says, so you shall purge the evil from your midst, whether that is the man who perpetrated the woman, or the woman who perpetrated man by bringing forth false charges. Verse 25. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. And so this supports what I said previously. See, in the city, people are in close proximity of each other. So therefore, if a woman is, has just been raped, at least, someone can hear her with people being close by. In the country, it is understood that, you can be a distance away from people. So to yell, maybe and depending on where you're at, no one is going to hear you. So, it's understandable. But she still has a duty to come back and say that this is what took place to me. And that's the implication. Let me read that again. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. So now how did they find out about this? Because they were in an open country, no one is there, and guess what? That means that the woman had to tell. Verse 26. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor. Verse 27, because he met her in the open country, and though the betrothed young woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. If a man meets a virgin, verse 28, who is not betrothed, and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. Now, this cuts into another area that is so strange from our culture and far from understanding. In the system that God gave to Israel in terms of how to govern as a nation, one of the requirements was the protection of the sanctity of a woman. See, one of the very principles between the relationship between a man and a woman in ancient Israel was that it was the man's duty to protect the woman. And so whether if she was under the care of her father, her brother, her uncle, or her husband, she was to be protected. And so the men were responsible for protecting the women. And so as a result of this, men being responsible for protecting the women, if this particular woman who had been raped or had allegedly been raped, was under the direct care of her father and not a husband, then the penalty, as in a previous case, it would have been to the husband who's now had his engaged or betrothed wife now violated. So he's been violated against by this perpetrator, and that's the reason why the perpetrator is punished, because he violated not only the woman, but he violated the man who was engaged to marry her. Well, in this case, if she's not married, he's violating the father. And the penalty for it is that, instead of the father losing his daughter, the penalty for it is that the father is to be repaid not by necessarily killing the man, but giving the man the obligation or imposing the obligation by law for this man to marry the woman that he has violated. Now, I know that many would say, well, why would a woman ever want to marry a man that raped her? Well, you got to understand, in a system where women depended on men and their virginity was of high value, which it is not placed in this system, their virginity was of high value, then it was necessary that a woman preserved herself until the day she was married. And if she did not preserve herself, then it would decrease her chances of her getting married. And so being under the care of her father you know, let's say if you killed the man, you executed the man because he violated this father's daughter. Well, now the father is still left with possibly taking care of this daughter for the rest of his life. And so the whole goal in this is to make sure that the father does not have perpetual torment of this particular crime. And you know, so the adverse response, or the biblical principle response to addressing this particular incident, is to now ensure that the man that violated her take her off the father's hands. In other words, he now becomes responsible. And that is so different from our judicial system. See, in our judicial system, a person commits a crime, they go to jail, and let's say if they stole something, they robbed your house, right? Or they killed your son or your daughter through drunk driving. They get convicted, they go to jail. Guess what? You're further victimized in this system. Why? Because you have to pay for that person's stay at a state or federal penitentiary. You have to pay for them to go to college. You have to pay for them to exercise. You got to pay for their meals, for their clothing, for their protection. You got to pay for all these things when you go to work, and they take the taxes out of your money. And that is the problem with this system as opposed to the system that God established for his people. The alleged perpetrator, the violator, the predator, the guilty one was responsible for paying their own penance, paying the price of their own guilt. Not the victim have to repetitively, perpetually pay to take care of the person that has violated them. That was not justice in the biblical principles that we are seeing here today. That was not the way in how the God of the nation of Israel thought would be best for his people. But we don't live in that nation. We live in the United States of America. And I get it, and I understand that we're so far removed from the system. But I think it was very important for me to share these principles with you guys to show you the difference and the contrast between what we got going on here in the United States and how do we deal with sexual crimes or crimes period, as opposed to what does the Bible have to say about addressing these crimes, particularly dealing with the subject of sexual allegations. So whether if Mr. Cosby committed the crime or not, the question is, did we really handle it as a nation properly? Did we handle it as a judicial system properly? Did we put the same moral obligation for the women who brought these allegations to be scrutinized, just as we brought the same moral obligation for Mr. Cosby to be scrutinized? As we wrap all of this up, I must review that question for you one more time. What does the Bible teach concerning how a nation should judicially handle cases of sexual allegations? Now, there are 7 points to review as we do this. The first point is there should be nothing less than 2 credible witnesses who corroborate with evidence to support their testimony they are alleging in an incident. Number 2, for a society's judicial system to be fully just, there must be a thorough investigation of the credibility and the testimony of not just the accused, but also of the witnesses as well as the accuser. Number 3, if it is established that the witness or accuser has lied in giving their testimony, then they too must be charged and should stand trial if their false accusation or testimony has been proven in a court. Then from there, it is only just if they receive the exact same punishment they intended for the falsely accused. Why? Because the Bible says such witnesses have acted maliciously. Number 4, such proceedings must be extremely fair. That's why eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth was in place. 5, sleeping with another man's wife is worthy of and is deserving of capital punishment in biblical marriage. A man becomes one with his wife physically, mentally, and spiritually. To sleep with her or rape with her is a violation against that man and is deserving of condemnation and death. It can never be regained, just as with murder. If a woman does not have a husband, number 6, in a true biblical society, she'd then be chaperoned by a husband or another man in her life. Because in ancient biblical African society, it was ultimately the man's responsibility to protect the woman. Another reason for this is if a daughter was raped, this was a direct violation not just against her but her father, and as a result, the father would then be owed compensation from the convict, as well as the convict was obligated to marry his daughter in order to prevent against the father from being further victimized. By not seeing his daughter ever married because she had been tarnished through rape, the father would likely be forced to take care of her for the rest of his life. Here, within the United States, women are quote unquote liberated from such protection and authority of men, and are then left to fend for themselves, with no one to speak for them. So could this be the very reason why so many are date raped, manless, and by the age of 30 and 40 are due to a lack of men willing to commit, are being taken advantage of in the workplace? They are having to navigate for themselves in a pond of sharks. Number 7, the alleged victim had a moral obligation to cry for help in Israel, whether during or after the alleged incident. Why? To prevent and to ensure a safer society, so that others would not be violated by the same perpetrator. Now, does having a society where justice is ignored, undermined, or abandoned a place that has the best interests of women? Does it for children or for the elderly and the weak? The answer is obviously no. Which culture would you say is it better? Is it ours or the biblical culture that we read about today? With that, I'm going to leave you with that to marinate on. If you like what you've heard today, I ask that you subscribe, like this channel if you like it, and keep digging in the word. So with that said, I'm out. God bless you and take care. Look out for the next video content uploaded here on Digging in the Word.